Okay, the sound check. Still working out. Okay, got everything. Hear us all in the background. Yeah, we're good.
Excellent. All right, so we will call our committee of the whole to order at 6:01 p.m. And just an update for our agenda. Unfortunately, our MLA, Joseph Scow, could not be with us this evening, so we will be removing that from the agenda. If everybody is okay with that, since he will be joining us. Right? So if that's okay, then we'll just get right into it with our first presentation from Stantec. We're so excited to have you back, like I said earlier. It's nice to see you, and we're excited to see what you have to present to us today. So I'll just turn it right over to you, and you're welcome to go ahead.
Yes,
Yes, please come and join us.
And do I just tell you when?
Just
Go
go ahead.
next? Okay. Thank you. I feel like you're really in the hot seat up there.
I know, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Up close. Awesome. Well, good evening, Chair, committee members, and councillors. Happy to be here, and thank you for having us. My name is Christina Lombardo, and I'm a planner with Stantec. Thank you in advance for your time, and as well to administration for the opportunity to speak with you all today. So I want to start out by making some introductions for our project team. Myself on the Stantec side as a planner, and Brad Schmidt-Key on engineering and technical. We are representing this project on behalf of Bud Hogewide, along with the owner of the subject lands. So as you guys remember, on August 2nd, 2022, we made a presentation to introduce a proposal for an area structure plan to you all to receive some feedback on our initial concept. Since then, we've done some further refinement, technical studies, and taken all feedback under advisement to return today and provide some additional context, information, and updates regarding the proposed ASP. So today we will discuss project initiation and policy considerations, our approach to land and overall direction, a context of our approach to the plan, and some high-level overall timing for our submission, as well as project engagement. So following an increase in development interest in the area, the owner of the subject lands began exploring the planning and technical requirements that would be required to develop their lands. Identifying an area structure plan would be required as per the municipal development plan. Stantec was engaged in March of 2022. The subject lands are well situated to accommodate residential development, generally the flat topography, compatibility with surrounding residential, proximity to transportation corridors such as Range Road 223, 45th Avenue, and 6th Street, as well as opportunities to connect to the existing servicing in town, make this area well suited for an integrated residential development within the town's boundary. The subject lands are located in the southeast end of town, located along the municipal boundary between the town of Coalhurst and Lethbridge County on the east and south sides. The area being considered is about a quarter section or 160 acres. And there is one additional landowner located within this area who is aware of this proposal and has been included in conversations as this project progresses. So moving forward, I wanted to discuss a little bit of the background of the applicable legislative requirements or hierarchy of plans of how this proposed ASP fits into the policies that have been laid out by the province. So starting with the Municipal Government Act, or MGA, any proposals made must be consistent with support the goals of all higher level legislation. In this case, we are working with the MGA, the SSRP, which is the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan, a Southern Alberta Regional Plan that's based around the South Saskatchewan watershed, the Intermunicipal Development Plan, or IDP, which is a cooperative plan with Lethbridge County and the town of Coalhurst, and finally the Municipal Development Plan, or MDP. The idea with these documents is as information moves throughout these policies, the direction becomes more precise and detailed, narrowing in to a particular location. In the town's approved MDP, the subject area discussed today has been identified as requiring an area structure plan prior to development that needs to be approved by council through a bylaw and provide direction for subsequent subdivision and developments within the area. Several background studies have been completed, are also completed to develop this information and consider requirements of development, such as transportation, environmental constraints, servicing requirements, stormwater management, geotech reviews, public engagement, etc. So the ASP will set out a roadmap for any incoming developments and plan out long-term infrastructure needs. Without this, the plan can risk piecemeal style developments that do not best utilize land or infrastructure investments and can become challenging for the town to maintain. But what comes after the ASP? So following the adoption of this ASP, investors and developers will come into this area and purchase land within the plan and prepare land use amendments, which is the LUB, and amend areas to specific land uses from the land use bylaw, land use districts. Once those land uses are confirmed or adopted by council, the developer then advances to subdivision stage, finally development permits and building permits to follow, which provide the highest level of detail and serves as the final stage of implementation prior to occupancy. So moving back into the MDP, the town approved by council in 2017. Part 2 of this document discusses growth, which identifies the overall growth management strategy for the town of Coalhurst. So what we have on the slide here is from map 1, identifying the future land use concept. And we see predominantly there is a new living area, which identifies where a majority of residents will reside and shall be comprised mainly of single unit and multi-unit dwellings or low and medium density development, as specified within your MDP plan. And additionally, the new employment area, which is in the northeast, from the MDP describes neighborhood convenience, commercial or business park style developments. And this area is expected to provide a range of local commercial uses to meet the community's needs. So when we came in August, or our presentation, we showed you this bubble plan and a similar bubble plan, and kind of got some of your thoughts and feedback on what you guys thought. And based on those conversations and the direction received, we've moved forward to a more detailed concept or block plan to further direct how this area structure plan moves. Giving a little bit of context of what's already located in this area to the north and to the west, you see the developed community areas. And then the next slide is a little bit clearer to give you some more definition as to how this has moved forward with the different technical studies that we've done since, taking your feedback and continue to advance this plan to what you see here today. So this concept aligns with the MDP direction by utilizing a primarily residential development within the new living area and a commercial development that's focused in the northeast corner within what would be the new employment area. These lands, since we last spoke, have gone through various technical reviews to ensure that this land is suitable for this type of development, including a geotechnical report, a mining study, and environmental site assessment, and no concerns have been noted. So responding to the market needs of the community, the pedestrian and vehicular connectivity have been prioritized in this plan to meet the existing communities of Sundance and the residential area along 6th Street, which is north of our plan area. And we've used some neighborhood design principles to complement the existing features of the town. We've also built in some flexibility with the swing sites to allow for this area to develop according to the needs of the community at the time of development. Next slide, please. So just continuing on to give you some conceptual idea or to be able to visualize what this community could look like, we just included some photos. This isn't what's proposed, it's just to give you an idea of what's been built out elsewhere. So for the single family residential, the low density residential, we have single family or single detached homes, next slide, or semi-detached homes, which would be the duplex style home. Next slide. And multi-family residential could be utilized as row homes, anywhere from 3 to 6 homes connected, or you could do a bare land condo, which could be a 2 to 3 story style development, and that would be considered what the medium density would look like in this context. Finally, the commercial development is dependent upon what investors come into the market and what they're looking for at the time of application, obviously, but this is an idea of something that could be utilized in the space in the Northeast as well. So moving on to the next steps, we are hoping to move forward to engagement with the general public and the community members of the area. We hope to continue to gain a greater understanding of this plan area context, any opportunities and constraints of the area through the lived experiences of these stakeholders. So we've identified the stakeholders as town administration, adjacent municipalities, adjacent landowners, and the general public. But if there are additional parties that should be included in this list, happy to have you let us know, and we can include those, as we want to make sure that all parties have the ability to be involved and share any input on the plan. This engagement will also be followed by further detailed engineering studies. But prior to undertaking those, we wanted to come back here today to review this updated plan with you all and hope that we can have some support from the members of council to continue the development of this. So if there is any clarity that you need on any of the information that we've provided today, myself, Brad, or Bud are available. But again, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to council and see if there's any questions that anyone has. Go ahead.
First, thank you for the presentation. That was wonderful, Christine. And I do like the swing site idea. I think it's a great idea for flexibility. I was curious as to what was the intent behind locating that large parcel of MR to the southwest corner?
Let's go back. Can we stand up?
Come on up. There you go.
I think Brad would be better suited to maybe answer this question.
Mayor Montina, Brad Schmicke with Stantec. I'm glad to be here. Deputy Mayor Patry, when we looked at the MR in that area, one of the things that happened, it's hard to see in this photo, but the canal infrastructure, in terms of what that could ultimately be in terms of a green space through the community, we kind of saw this node of MR as that connection to it would be kind of interesting to play on, because there is that green break between Sundance and to this community. So, beyond that, it could be in other areas, but that was really one of the things we thought as a buffer and as that connectivity to, we've seen in other areas where canal corridors have become kind of pathways when you think of Coaldale and Lethbridge and what's going on there in a few places. So just that opportunity.
Absolutely. No, that's good. I just was, actually. Thank you.
Can we stick on that one for one moment?
Sure.
Is that also the train that goes right by there? And so that reduces your need for a berm, right? If you don't have residential along there, if it's.
That is, if you look at that as well, right? Or there's an opportunity to create some buffering within that green space with the residential as well, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So if it is municipal reserve and it is a green space, then we wouldn't be required to berm it or, because there's no housing in that area, is that?
You wouldn't be subject to the restrictions of railroad setbacks in terms of what those ultimately might be off that rail line, would be my understanding, yes.
I believe also, Mayor, that when we spoke earlier, we are going to require a second water crossing under the highway and eventually replace the reservoir. And this would be a good location for that as part of MR land. I don't know if CP Rail would have to come to the table on this as well, because the tracks are very close there.
I would say probably as you get into the further stages beyond the ASP, yes, certain impact. There's usually a buffer zone of any development along that corridor would be required in terms of communications. So
It's nice if it can be a win-win, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Did you have additional questions?
The proposed storm pond areas, would those be dry ponds or wet ponds or both? Or
Currently, we are looking at them as potentially being wet ponds in the facility or in the area. We haven't completed our stormwater management reports yet because, again, as Christina was saying, it's nice to have a gauge of some certainty that the layout is generally, acceptable before we go on with those studies. What I do like about the wetland opportunity, it is a nice amenity for communities and residential areas. We are aware that you do have the wetland just to the north that's being constructed. We've kind of placed that pond to be a perfect connection into that as well in terms of flow through. So nothing written in stone yet, but contemplating wet pond at this point. So.
Yeah, you can.
Okay. One of the parts in the NDP talks about having a distinct identity. And when I look at the images, I mean, I'm not overly thrilled that it's distinct, but I know that's a subjective term. So I'm curious. What do you see as distinct about this? What would you say? Giving it what gives it a distinct identity?
Well, Deputy Patry, I'd almost say that is another step that we need to take in the process as we develop this plan. So I do know that as part of an ASP, architectural controls are somehow involved. And we haven't really got to that stage with the owner of the lands in terms of community branding. What's the vision for the architecture of the space at this point? So that's really a process that we haven't totally developed yet at this point. And I think it'd be premature for me to make any comment on that at this stage. So, but I think there's, definitely input and discussion that will need to happen and come later as we move forward. So,
yeah, I mean, based on the street layout, you assume a certain depth of parcel and
yes,
and lot width. I'm presuming you have some kind of idea of, right? And so there's some assumptions going into that already, right? Is what maybe I'm meaning by that.
Oh, okay. Maybe I read. Certainly could.
No, I'm just thinking
read too
about
much into it. Yeah. I can tell you that in terms of the depths and potential widths, we are thinking similar style single detached that you see in let's say West Lethbridge or wherever. It is that style of development. This one is a little more of a grid or modified grid format rather than the curvilinear designs.
Which I like this better than the curvy.
Yeah.
But that's just me.
But to be honest, in terms of the vision and what ultimately the product of the homes will be at this point, we haven't got to that stage at all. At this level, when we have block outlines, there's a little bit of buffer and margin in terms of the geometry because obviously we're not at subdivision yet. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned stakeholders, and can you replace that list of stakeholders?
Yeah,
Can you just
absolutely.
consult with them, sorry?
Yeah, so we have town administration, adjacent municipalities, adjacent landowners, and just general public.
I have a question.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Can I have a gentle turn for a moment?
Sorry.
That's okay. You are our resident genius when it comes to this stuff. So I know that I've mentioned it before, but I'm not sure where along the process that we sort of look at that vision of what a commercial space might look like. Is you keep those same pictures in there, and my hope is that we don't wind up with a giant parking lot and a big building. Looking for something that just has a little more creativity, something that is, when you're talking distinct, sort of a small town, walkable kind of commercial zone. And I think it lends itself beautifully to the giant park we're going to have across the street, because that's going to be a nice big recreation site. Where in this process do we sort of have that? Is that when we start talking to builders, or?
Yeah, Councillor Caldwell, it is a step beyond the ASP process and the current land ownership and the control they'll have on development in the future as well. What we find with commercial spaces, and I'll just take a quick step back in terms of the swing site opportunity in that northeast area. We had heard previously that maybe the area was too small. What if it needs to be bigger? And we're trying to build that flexibility into the ASP so that if somebody comes in and they want a larger space and it seems to make sense for the market to do so, you won't have to go back and go through a cumbersome ASP amendment. At the same token is if we get too prescriptive in terms of what the architecture is going to look like and what that site is designed at, there's no flexibility in this document if we take that level of detail forward. And what I've found during development of other commercial spaces in the city, there are visions that the market just can't absorb. We may want something that looks exactly like this, but it doesn't work in the market. And you'll never court a developer to come into the community to invest in something that, you know, they couldn't make work and make a business case for. So where it actually happens, you know, I would say it's going to be at the subdivision sort of marketing stage of that land parcel, whatever we decide on the size. But it is beyond this plan, and this plan is about just providing the flexibility to allow for change. And I agree with you 100%. The connection to the wetland to the north opens up some great opportunity if there's some dreamers out there that say this could be a nice little community hub and people can go across the street and enjoy the open space. But we really can't get prescriptive on what it looks like.
Yeah, I'm not looking to be too prescriptive, but maybe we could just take that image out of the giant parking lot in the Wetland store. Just put an image that, and it can be a building, but I've seen these beautiful big buildings that have this storefront appearance along the edge. You know, those kinds of, just something that just has a little bit of a more small town feel.
Yeah.
Right, not big box store, that's all.
Yeah. I can hear that. We can definitely take that away and discuss it further too. Yeah.
Thanks.
Because we did look at.
I cringe every time I see that.
Yeah.
I want that to color my view of your whole presentation.
I have a question for you regarding the multifamily placement on there. So I see that it is like kind of this, it's one of the main entrances, it's kind of like that straight shot off onto the Range Road 223 there.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is regarding that, with multifamily, higher density, probably more kids around that area, and a lot of people will probably be using that as a way in. Has that been factored in just in a sense of like, in terms of safety, in terms if there's a lot of kids there?
That's a good, Christina, I don't know if that's something you can comment on.
I think like the idea of how the actual site is developed is more of like a development permit question. That's definitely something that can be addressed at the time of development permit or building permit when somebody comes in to actually develop it, whether there's different mechanisms in place to sort of guide pedestrians versus vehicles. I think the placement of the multifamily site is more based off of how it best works within the plan overall, and how we can sort of maximize a higher density in those areas with continued flow throughout the plan area and then into the rest of the town or the communities in other directions. But there's definitely different mechanisms that can be put in place to ensure that safety is a priority as well.
Yeah, because I can imagine like just with that there, people would go into like that lower part of Sundance, they'd probably use that part. And so I would think that there would probably be quite high traffic on that very, it's because it's a straight shot too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're also generator traffic too, right?
Pardon me?
Oh, multifamily, they're also high generator traffic too. So.
Yeah, so like that was just a question on that part.
It would be a beautiful high-end area though, for multifamily.
Mm-hmm.
If we can keep the safety in the forefront.
Yeah, I think that like for me, that's just always a concern because like I live on Sundance, like right at where everybody goes. And there's always like this thing about like the kids outside playing, right? And making sure that if there's a lot of kids in that area, like how to keep them safe.
Yeah.
Any further questions? I'm just gonna go over here first, okay? Well, we'll go to Councilor Florence, and then we'll go to Councilor Ackermans.
Thank you. No, I just had a question about, and thank you for the presentation, that was awesome. I have a presentation about the flag site and the swing sites because talking about the developers and basically like the appetite for developing it. So then how much control do we have over what it can actually be if it's a flag site or a swing site?
So, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, through the chair. Essentially what the swing site does is when a developer comes in and is ready to actually develop that land, it gives council the ability to approve a land use to a multifamily site, to a low density residential or a commercial site based on where the market's at, what the application is for. So it just relieves the necessity for an ASP amendment, which adds an extra layer of time and cost to any developer trying to come in. But council still ultimately has the say as to, or yeah, as that
In
land.
terms of land use, yeah.
Yeah, what the district is that's approved for that type of development in that area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a question, so the copy that we have in front of us here is slightly different. You guys have a swing site down here, so I'm wondering which one is the current version, I guess.
It's my fault. I'll take the hit for this one. This is the one that you see on the screen here is the most up to date, the most recent version. That was our previous iteration. We've kind of taken some of your feedback from that last meeting, and this is what we've updated it to.
Okay, perfect. I got a few other questions here. I guess one of the other questions is, do you have any idea of what the total population of this would be for an addition to town, or like the number of possible houses or anything like that? Are there any sort of numbers kicking around?
That is a great question.
Still a little early.
Oh, I'm running through the math, and how was I prepared for that one? Honestly, no. But Councillor Ackerman's, I mean, my guess, I think we looked at this, like I say, it was a few months ago that we were back in here, and I thought a population of, I thought it was in the range of 2,000 people or something would probably sit in this kind of an area. It could be a little more. Like in Lethbridge, we might see more density in a quarter section, but in a smaller community, you might see less. And the multifamily is what the commercial ends up to be eventually. But we would, honestly, one of the next steps for us in terms of the overall process is to, if we have general consensus on the plan, is to take those steps. Now, what are our density targets? What are we looking at? Further studies on what the roads look like and some of the engineering side stuff.
No, I was just thinking like service capacity and stuff, right? Just making sure that everything would be in line there. I guess another question is, I know that's something that we've spoken about as a council is making community accessible through things like community pathways. Is that something that would be just included in that municipal reserve, or is that something that we would have to distinctly ask for? Because I know that's something that we would like to see kind of through new developments in town.
In terms of connectivity through a neighborhood like this, I mean, I think it's well set up in terms of what the vision might be for sort of regional type networks. One, I mentioned the canal, which has certain things where it's piped, and that would work well. As well on the east the east boundary of the site, there is a natural green strip there on the other side of the gas line that I think provides great connectivity straight through in terms of something regional that could go to the park. Internally, we haven't looked at creating linear pathway networks, but of course, we're thinking of sidewalks in terms of general connectivity for people. So at this point, the plan hadn't included linear pathways within the quarter section, but I think the boundaries, provide that, and connectivity from the residential out to those fringe areas on the boundaries would just happen with the sidewalks as we prepare them with the road cross sections.
And just one final question, I just noticed on here, it seems slightly askew, is that correct? Is it just slightly shifted off north? I don't know.
It probably is.
I was just kind of curious more than anything. So that's all I've got for you guys. Thank you guys so much for your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councillor Florence, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. I just had one more question about the, when you talked about future assessments and for the roads and stuff. So does that take into account like traffic calming and things like that?
What we need to do, one of the steps that we go beyond here is to complete a traffic impact assessment, which will give us certain indicators of key intersections and how they're going to operate in the future. At an ASP level, we would speak to those nodes in terms of what the appropriate traffic controls might be, what could be considered in these areas. At this stage, though, we wouldn't get into what the actual detail of that is, right, in terms of detailed design components. But we'd highlight sort of those key things. That typically the detail of that would happen at a subdivision stage or an engineering stage later on. So.
Thank you. So I shouldn't say we're more traffic circles at this point.
You bet.
Is there any further questions? Go ahead.
So I noticed there's no lane rates shown on this. Is that a future one? Or is that the intention is that there'd be no lane rates?
Deputy Mayor Patry, no, that is not the intention. As I said, we've tried to build in buffer with the dimensions that you're seeing. I mean, not to get into the nuts and bolts, but in terms of sizing, what we've provided in this plan is there is flexibility so that where you see kind of that straight dash line, there is enough room in there should a lane, be desired in a certain area. What we see is that laned and laneless product are both equally good, but at an ASP stage, it's very difficult to say lane here, laneless here kind of thing until you get further into it. But certainly we could add language in the ASP that speaks to that to be determined later. And the geometry here allows for that addition, let's put it that way.
And the block sizes are ASPS for 60 to 100 meter type of block sizes. And it looks close, like you kind of follow that, is that correct?
Close, there are probably, I can see a couple that would be over 100 probably for sure, but in general, yes. Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about when you mentioned the approximate 2,000 people size was actually about future schools, elementary school perhaps or something. And the only spot that would work is that MR in the corner that we kind of use for saying we're using for other reasons, right? So it doesn't appear that there would be, because that's a 6 acre, right? You said, so. Okay. And yeah, I'm curious if we shouldn't consult with Coalhurst School Division as one of the stakeholders to get their input, I think at least. If they maybe they don't need one, right? It would be good to consult with them. Because I mean, especially if you have, I don't know, do you see typically with a quarter section of land, a school site, I guess? Is that something you have seen in your experience?
I think the context in Coalhurst is a little different, maybe with the school situation here. But if I think of West Lethbridge and the school site that's going in, basically there's a new elementary school going in centered on 4 quarter sections, basically is what's going on. There are other schools in the area, high schools and that sort of thing, but that's what we've kind of seen. And I think if I'm thinking of other plans, it's kind of in that 3 to 4 quarter sections, almost a full section.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for that context.
Yeah.
It's good to know. Yeah, and I guess when I'm coming back to distinct identity, I think I'm speaking for myself maybe because council's intention is actually to look at the MDP a little bit more. So we don't perhaps have a clear direction as to where we want to go. But for me at least, I would like to see more a diverse. I think we are not the same regulatory environment as Lethbridge, and so we have the opportunity, I think, to do different things and offer different things than Lethbridge, and whereas maybe they don't work in Lethbridge, right? But maybe they can work here because we have that ability to pivot, right? So and adapt. So I guess put your thinking caps on, but like do pocket parks potentially, or mixed use, or live work, or there's I think a million different types of things that you could do in a small community that you maybe couldn't do in a big city, right? So that's why I think where I'm kind of heading with the innovative park is you laying out the streets in that way that's assuming a certain type of development, right? Mm-hmm. Which may I mean it's simple, I guess, straightforward, but I think it's maybe not giving Coalhurst the chance to be a unique community is really what is how I feel about it. So, okay. But I'm speaking for myself. So
I can ask a question on that. What do you think would be the risk associated with stepping outside of what's safe, like what sort of that, that safe formula. If we were to say that we want to look at this, do you think it would be opening up opportunities for builders to come in, or would they say this doesn't feel, it's not traditional, it doesn't feel safe? And I don't know, you're in that field, I'm not familiar with it, but, I mean, I would ask for that whole little corner to be a tiny home community. I mean, that would be where I can retire. But I'm just curious, like what would be, like what is the feeling out there for that kind of stuff? Are people still looking for just those traditional blocks and traditional houses side by side? Is that what builders are looking for? Or?
Not builders. That's what the builders are looking for.
Yeah, but I mean, they're the ones that are gonna be coming in and buying up lots and building, and I'm just wondering what's the appetite out there for different unique kinds of diverse housing?
Diane actually had her hand up.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm just maybe gonna jump in at this point and maybe back things up just a tiny little bit. Because again, this is a full quarter section, this is a 2,000 people. This is not, it's gonna end up, the purpose of this plan is to really create block plans. So again, we're gonna find a 3-acre piece or a 7-acre piece or the commercial piece. And there's gonna be more planning done once they figure that out. But really what you want at this stage is sort of the big outline. What are some things that cannot move? So the road east-west, that's a go. We can't move that, we need to have that, but maybe we can shift things within the phases. So again, if there's something unique that comes or someone wants to do something, that's when council can, impact what that might look like when you want to talk about identity. So I know what's going through my mind is saying, well, I'm sure Christine's going to put policy in the implementation section for those when they come to the next stage. What is council looking for? We want distinct community identity. We want these things to be included in your plans coming forward. But at this point, what Brad and Christine and Bud are saying is, overall, we need to know, here's our phases. These 3 phases need to go into this storm pond. So before you do phase 1, 2, 3, this has to be somehow included in it so that we don't end up with a storm pond in phase 1 and a storm pond in phase 2 and a storm pond in phase 3. We're trying to do this holistically, but we're kind of at this top level, and that there's so much more detail coming when we get into the next phases and into the concept design plans and those types of things. Maybe to expand on what Councillor Florence was saying, it's like all of those neat things can happen on those swing sites, but if we know that, hey, something comes in and we think it's a good fit, and it's neat and unique, and it's kind of maybe more dense that maybe wouldn't go next to people that are very low dense, well, maybe we can put them in a swing site, or we can make those determinations as you go. And it gives you the opportunity to, those are the unique sites, that if you want to do something different, you can decide. Or if you say, hey, a single family 50 by 100-foot lots are just going like hotcakes, we're gonna do it there. So I mean, it allows you to be able to react really quickly. So just keeping that in mind, that some of those nitty-gritty details are really another stage or two.
You're calling our dreams nitty-gritty details. we're just dreaming for a moment here.
Yeah, and what I want to say is that those dreams can be accommodated. There doesn't, and you don't have to get into trying to be that prescriptive. What you want to be able to do is build flexibility in, and that's what I think is being proposed here. As well as putting in maybe some very clear policy about some of the minimum expectations for the next phases of what council's expecting to see.
Thank you for that. That's great.
This is why Diane is our balloon holder. Thank you for that.
Keep
us on track. Keep us on track.
Is there any other questions? Go ahead.
I'm just curious, what are the next steps in this process, and then what timeline is associated with that?
Councillor Ackerman, so again, I think the next steps really are set expectations. I know we saw the timeline and it was like ASP application. Well, that's not happening tomorrow. We do have a bunch of work to do yet. I think our thoughts on this is gauge the council administration support of kind of what we've shown you here today. we take that to the next edge of doing some engagement, doing some further engineering, refining things. We're really a few months out before an ASP is done. I can't give you an exact timeline on when that happens in terms of an application. It's about all I can at this point, but for us, I think the biggest thing is a level of comfort with what we've shown you, or a discussion on the next steps before we take the plunge and do the rest of the area structure plan.
Just to follow that up then, do you guys have any ideal start of development timeline or anything like that, where you have like an end goal to get shovels on the ground by a certain date or anything like that, even if it's like a couple of years out or?
I haven't had a discussion personally with the landowner in terms of their desire to start turning dirt today. Bud, maybe I could turn to you on that.
Until we really go through the performance stages to see if this can fly from a development end. And Stantec haven't taken it to that level to be able to actually put timing to it. So once they've completed that, then they create the performance with respect to, okay, now can you go in and does this work? So that's where it's very careful on what you do in the very beginning, because it's always front end loaded when you do a development. And so there has to be cash coming. And so until that's come out, they don't want to make a time yet.
Okay. Sounds good.
Other than I would like to see this done. So that we can get to that stage where they can make a decision. And in fact, when you even talk about the commercial, that becomes available, because they don't develop, the developer doesn't develop the commercial. It's just a block of land. And then somebody purchases that land, then comes to you folks and says, here's what we'd like to do. And that's where you get the opportunity actually on the commercial to determine what it looks like, with landscaping and all those things. But we're trying to get to that point with getting all the approvals so they can make a decision on where does this start? Where does the first phase start?
Well, that sounds great, thank you.
All right, good.
So there's like two streets that connect up to 45th Ave, right? And there's the one that also lines up with 6th Street to the west. But the other one, I think, like, I'm curious, maybe it's a question for Diane. Has that been checked if that aligns with our proposed future? Yeah.
Yes, it has. And again, it's where the services are stepped off and so yes, so that was a discussion with the proponents when we determined where that location is going to be.
Excellent, that's great.
All right, is there any further questions?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment, and I think that it's just in Coalhurst, if you build it, they will come, so I look forward to seeing this too.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your presentation today. Is there anything that you're hoping to get from us besides this conversation at this point?
I mean, at this point, we really wanted to show you our next steps. It's hard to say, it was an information session, but we are looking for a level of comfort that we are heading in the right direction, right, in terms of what you folks are looking for in your community. So we can certainly catch up with Jeff and Diane and whatever in the next few weeks to see how things are going. So, yeah.
That would be great.
And sorry, so that one is the correct one, this one's not?
Correct.
Oh.
You like the other one?
No, well, I'm just looking for self-alignment on the streets, right? The one has a straight through now, from 6 all the way south.
Right.
And then the other one's shifted down, where's yeah. That's kind of a big change I just noticed. And the MR seems smaller for some reason, but you guys maybe have too much.
Actually in the initial iterations we did, and I would say there's still a right sizing component that needs to happen in the overall plan to get the percentages right, so.
Well, thank you so much. This was really great to see where this has progressed to, and I'm excited to keep moving the process forward. And like you said about getting this going, eventually getting to that point. So this is very exciting, and yes, we'll have more discussions as a council and pass information along through our CAO, and we can connect back with you and let you know kind of everything for that.
Excellent.
But thank you so much, this was great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night.
As well.
We got a digital copy of that presentation, is that all right?
We have it in our meeting.
Mayor, I'm asking a question.
Yes,
So you're in Montana.
I am. What are you gonna ask me?
Well, no, I work with Greeno, the
Yes,
city, right?
Yeah.
So what's the connection?
that's my father-in-law.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah. I didn't
I'm
realize-
sitting there thinking.
Yeah.
Yes. Isn't your father-in-law from Coalhurst?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you see him, say hi to him.
I will do
Please.
that. I will do that. I like to see him later today, so I will let him know that. It was nice to see you.
We just need to connect. This is pretty exciting stuff.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. All right, we'll just wait for Jeff to get back here, but it's Diane. I think wherever you're comfortable is fine.
Let me go there, so I can.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Better. I'm gonna work with you.
Let's split.
My presentation. No, but just take these little-
A wild week, so. A wild week. I'm sorry, I killed some trees.
It's honestly, what you do, you were right there. You hit the nail on the head. We built it and they're gonna show them. And we've got people like, you know, we're in a chronic state of housing shortage.
Housing and commercial shortage.
And well, very much a commercial shortage, yeah.
All right, so I with this today, we're looking at timetable setting for the MVP slash land use bylaw conversation. So I'm just gonna turn it right on over to you.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks for having me tonight. I don't have a whole lot prepared, but I did want to, what I passed out was the presentation that we went through last April. So just to kind of refresh everybody, because that had all our different planning, big plans that we have for the municipality, and we kind of went them at a very high level once. We kind of explained what they all were and what their purposes are. Then in sort of mid spring to summer, we did do a couple of sessions during Committee of the Whole, going over some of the things within the land use bylaw and the new one that we are trying to complete. We still have probably one more session with that, because I know that we passed out all the land use districts, and I think the instructions were go home over the summertime and let's read about them, and then let's get back in prior to budget, but I know that didn't quite work out. So we do have to do that, as well as perhaps review some of the standards of development. So that may be one or two, depending on how long a session you want, how long you want me to talk, but maybe we could break it down into two smaller ones if that makes more sense. Once we get that completed and council has a draft that you're comfortable with, then it would be heading to public consultation with either an open house, media, whatever you want to do with that. Normally, I know that what was being sort of tossed around was coming to a open house just for a land use bylaw. That's not super exciting, so we normally don't get a really great turnout. Talking about lot sizes and whatnot. So I know that you had a couple of other outstanding items. I know there was, at the time, the review of the offsite levy bylaw and something else. So we were trying to kind of do like, hey, a whole night of planning and come and look at 3 different booths so that you weren't just coming here for one thing. So I don't know if that's still council's wish or not, but I'm sure that once we have a bit of a conversation, perhaps we can put a timeline together as to what and how you would like that engagement to occur. The second big thing is the municipal development plan. And I understand that you do want to review that, determine if there's things or changes you want to make or does it meet your current needs. My thoughts on that is that it's a fairly new document. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. So I think it would be worth our while to, again, spend a couple of sessions kind of going through sections and then determining if there was any amendments that you wanted to put forward so that we could then bring a sort of a package together. And again, whether or not that was tag teamed with an open house with, hey, here's our changes to the municipal development plan, here's our changes to the land use bylaw, kind of, you know, again, I'll take 2 out of the 3 spots if that's the case and bring some extra planners to answer questions. So again, it's really, I'm looking for some input and some direction from council as to sort of how much detail you want to go in, how much information you want on these 2 projects, and sort of how do you want these to kind of roll out. So, happy to have some open discussion.
Is there anyone who'd like to start?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I guess my initial thoughts with having these conversations are we haven't, as a council, really talked about what the future of Coalhurst might look like for expansion paths, if there would be an industrial or anything like that. So I would like to really have those high-level discussions on what can fit where and how it aligns with their plan and how we can make that work, right? If there's things that aren't feasible or that we've explored, or maybe we have to take a second shot at, say, talking to the county about a shared industrial park or something, just to be able to have those high-level ones.
Would it be, again, I think that would feed back into kind of, the MDP itself tells you where you've been, sort of what you're planning to do, and then where you want to be in 25 years. So that may very well, again, if we go through some of that and have some, open conversation about each one's like why things are the way they are and what works and what hasn't worked and what's been tried, and that'll perhaps give you some background as to, I don't want to say it's constraints, but sometimes if you put a road here, I mean, you're kind of stuck with that. You kind of have to keep going in that direction. That doesn't mean you can't bend in the road somewhere, but you kind of have to understand like exactly what makes sense, why we haven't developed in certain areas. Is there infrastructure issues? Is there, water table issues or whatever? So that may, again, provide you with that overarching understanding of the community itself and how it develops.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, one of the things, just to follow up on Councillor Ackerman's, one of the things that I've spoken with individual members of council and kind of where they seem to be going collectively, and I've not had the opportunity to update you, so I apologize for this. Just looking at some form of a visioning session to be able to articulate what each of them is thinking individually. It obviously has to be a collective direction if you're influencing a document like an MDP or a land use bylaw. So coming to some point where they can put together what it is that individual visions are and to be able to articulate that so that they know what the intersection points of the MDP are. So we run into a road, we can't move 223, so the idea of doing this is going to have to be reconsidered, but at the same time being able to express what each of them is thinking as well. So I'm looking at an opportunity to perhaps just bring somebody in to say, okay, let's talk about the vision, but everybody has to understand as well as what exists. And then find the points where we can, well, you know what, maybe this needs to be changed. So that's kind of, on what Councillor Ackerman is talking about. It's one of the few things, as you know, the only specific councils get that opportunity to look at an MDP and have the impact on it. So it's something this council is really expressing the opportunity to do. So we'll try to fit that into process somewhere along the line.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great, because that's very much it. Like this, so what that was here is if you read back and you look at the one from 2000 compared to, I mean, this is definitely sort of MDP 5.0. Doesn't mean we can't get to 10 or whatever. That's the idea. They're always building on each other. Like you can't throw it out, but you can always continue to put your stamp and what you want as things change. So that's always important. And I think it's really interesting because I find a lot of the things that I hear around the table about live work units and, tiny houses, and it's all possible. It's all allowed for, it's all in there, but it's, again, how do you implement it? So again, is it is there changes to the MDP, or is it that implementation document and your strategic plan and all of those other things that are actually going to feed into this? That this may, when you really read it and understand sort of, all the pieces and how they fit together, that you may say, hey, this actually meets what we need. We want to do a couple of tweaks for sure, but now how do we move it into those phases as we heard earlier? We have some of those ideas, we've got some bare land. How do we ensure that some of those visions that you want are then incorporated into those new plans moving forward? And how do you?
Yeah, I agree, there's tons of good stuff in this MDB, and I like, even like the commercial section is like spot on what we want, right? I think it's aligned with our vision, like we don't want strip malltopia like they showed us in the rendering. In our MDB, it shows not strip mall. So I think there's like tons of good stuff in here. And I wonder if it like, I think our conversations definitely do relate to both of these documents, and maybe trying to streamline things if possible in some cases, but I think a lot of it, to me, is like, well, we bought that industrial land, and Mayor Martinez saying, well, actually, do we even want it to be industrial land type thing? Like, and so it's those types of decisions we haven't agreed on yet, right? So that doesn't necessarily touch on MVP in a huge sense, right? So it is almost a development type focus. And then if we're in that parcel we have on the wetland, is that going to be what is that going to be, right? How do we have those conversations? Really, is what we want to do. We want to have those conversations.
And maybe that might be, and maybe that'll flow into things like, to me, those are very site-specific things. So is it a redevelopment plan? Is it a specific concept plan for that area where you don't have to go in and change what's in the MDP, because the MDP isn't that prescriptive. You have to think of the MDP as saying, in 25 years, if we did everything in here, that's what the kind of Coalhurst we're going to have. But it doesn't mean that you have to say, on this piece of land, you're going to do X, and on this piece of land, you're going, because again, that ties your hands, as they talked about with the swing sites. Then you have to go back in if you change your mind, or someone comes up with a really great idea. Well, now you got to go back and amend the MDP. And so that's why the MDP is, again, it's very bubbly. It's, again, that commercial area in the area we were just talking about, in the area structure plan, it's kind of this thing. Well, it could be this, it could be this, it could. If it was the whole thing, well, then we'd have to change the MDP. But we kind of said it's up in the corner and it's kind of fuzzy, and so that could be smaller, it could be bigger, it could be. So again, it's being able to be flexible and not having to go back in and change the bylaw or the MDP every time something comes up. You want it to be flexible enough that you can actually react a lot quicker than 3 months by the time you get through a bylaw amendment. So that's kind of it too. So it's, again, there could be other strategies that might be able to articulate your vision better, that may be even appendices, like here's our design guidelines for commercial. And that would give us something more than what's in here, but we develop design guidelines that append to this so that they know that, hey, and we put a policy in that says if you're doing commercial development within the town of Coalhurst, you must adhere to the design guidelines, which then, but again, you're not, it's just different ways of attaching things. So it's always about me trying to figure out what, my goal is, you have an end goal, how do I get you to your end goal? Because anything is possible, there's just 15 different pathways to get there, and which is, what do you want to do?
I think that's part of, in my opinion, that's where it's really hard, because there's not a lot of, like, sometimes without having constraint, it's overwhelming, right, about what it can look like. And I think that for myself, like, I'm a very visual person in terms of what this looks like to me. Like when things are boxes and things like that, it doesn't resonate with me as much. So I would like to really just have these conversations to say, like, what does this look like to us? And then maybe work back into, like, if you're saying this is possible or this is whatever. And like all these different types of, like what you're talking about, all these different homework or whatever you call that. Like, I'm not even aware of a lot of those things. And so I would love to hear from like my council colleagues, as well as other people that are like just experts in this area and kind of say, like, these are the things that are possible. Because I myself don't even really know what is possible. I know how I want it to feel and what I want it to look like, but I can't describe that properly, I guess. And so like that's really, I guess, my hope, and then we can figure out these other documents or these other pieces to kind of get us there. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for. And having that collective vision, because I think we're all seeing different things. We're like, we want it to look like this or feel like this, but we haven't fully had that conversation amongst ourselves.
And I do think it'd be, I mean, even having those, you know, we call it a half an hour sort of bear pit session where you look at the map and you start going, well, what about this? And then you can say, well, these are the, Kevin will be a person in the room as well saying, well, we have no sewer, we have no water, we have this. Okay, that in itself, so here's the constraint here. So again, it sometimes happens where development happens where it's path of least resistance. It's like water, right? If it's when the water doesn't run anymore, you run up against those areas, well, then you have to start making those tough decisions and determining what you want to do. So definitely I think that's would be super beneficial. Again, that is that visioning and trying to get everyone to say, if I could, it reminds me of what we used to do in grade 6, where you'd say, here, everyone complete how you want your town to look, right? And that's really the basics of it. And then you have to say, okay, well, hey, I like your idea and I like your idea, but that maybe isn't going to work, or how about this? And then you start figuring it together, and then we do what the developer's doing and trying to find where's the constraints, what isn't going to work. And I think that is important. And then once you figure that out, then it's again, let's go back here and say, okay, does this actually support those ideas? And if not, what's missing? And then what do we do from there? So again, I think it's going to be a couple of different sessions and trying to design what you want. Again, what's neat is we have 8 planners at the organization. Each one of us do different things. So again, if you're interested in, I can give you examples right now. Say live work. I've seen, where they've done cottage industry, where people are going to allow to be, hay carpenters in their garages and boutique, those types of things. We've got, live work where you have your boutique on the bottom or your business on the bottom and either your residence above or behind or whatever it is. You have the idea where, as we do in a regular downtown, where they want to have commercial or service industry on the main floor and apartments above. Well, that's live work too. It's just you're not living and working. So it can look any way you want it to look, but as you said, you have to have a developer that's coming in and wants to take that risk on doing that. I know I put in the cottage industry where you can put you can be the cabinet maker in the backyard in the town of Nobleford when I worked there in 2008. No one's ever made a zone change to that. It's been there. It's available for someone to utilize. They've got it all ready to go, but it's been 14 years and more than that. I can't do the math right now. But again, it's 2 things. It's getting everybody excited. It's getting the tools in place to enable it to happen. And then it's getting the right people in there to make it happen. Unless the municipality itself is making the determination they're going to make it happen. And then there's a whole different conversation about if you're going to become developers.
Yeah, and I just think that we haven't really talked about any of that. Like we've kind of done some high level stuff, and I think that just having those discussions would be great. Go ahead.
Thank you. I agree. I think that the NDP sessions we've done so far have been very informative, and I would love to continue to do them. I guess I have like a question or a comment, just like the policy, right? And so if we were to bring forward amendments to the NDP or whatever point, I'm not an expert, but just that's where we can have a really big impact too, right? So like even like changing policies around like the affordable housing or the high density housing or things like that, or be able to, in the same way that, we allow for stormwater and parking and stuff like that, but to be able to impact policy for the development and stuff like that. Is that something?
You can. And so like right now, for example, use affordable housing. The policy saying that an affordable housing strategy should be undertaken by council. So that's the big statement. So the implementation of that is put it into the budget and do the affordable housing study, which will then tell you what you need to do in the other portion. So it's those little bits, but I'm not sure you can put specific policy that would, like, I'm not sure what kind of policy you would want to include in an MDP that would be any more, what's the word? That would move affordable housing any faster, if that makes sense.
So can I ask
Yeah.
one question? So like if there were, I guess, would it be something that could be done in the subdivision plan or something like that, there would have to be a certain amount of housing that is affordable, or there's a certain amount that has to be small homes or big homes or whatever, just to like make sure that we're having a variety of housing options, and then also making sure we're having, like, once all that assessment is done and stuff, but do we have the ability to do that?
You do,
prescriptive with
because
it, or
what-
not so much?
what your MDP currently says is that you're to provide a variety of housing types.
Right.
But it doesn't prescribe 10% of this or 5% of that or 25% of this. So it does, when you come in and you get that concept plan in front of you, when someone wants to come in and do block 2, well, you can look at that and say, okay, number 1, we want boulevards in this one, and we want trees, and we want back alleys, and we want at least 25% of the lots to be multifamily. You can say that, and it can be put forward in that at that time. But again, you may then come to the next guy, and he comes up and he has this other idea, and you go, well, okay, well, it's 13% of this and 75% of that. Well, if you've prescribed that it has to be 5, 10, 15, 25, then are you flexible or are you inflexible? Yeah. So it's one of those tough ones. And so again, it's again having that conversation of what, even in my mind, what does affordable housing mean to you? And that's always, it's just the same idea as what does agriculture mean? What does affordable housing mean? And that's a big that's a whole conversation. Yeah. So that's like a whole nother conversation, so that you know that if you all agree, do you all agree with the vision of what affordable housing is? Is it market-based housing? Is it?
So then when you're talking about, like, we have outline stage, we're gonna say this is a boulevard and this is a lane, this is, but like the alignments have already been set in this stage, and that was my concern, is that, you know, you had 5 meters for a tree boulevard, you have 5 meters for a laneway, now it's lots shorter.
And I would suggest what they're probably going to do is have, as they do, I'm gonna use the city of Lethbridge. So you've got University. Well, you know, University Drive is there, but I mean, everything, and they want 3 connections within 300 meters of each other or whatever it is. Well, what happens beyond that? There's a little flexibility. And so they've probably incorporated within that a lane, and if not, you get really bigger, you get longer lots. And if not, or wider lots, or whatever it would be. And so it's all, you've got to be able to, when you're a developer, you have to have about 6 different outs, because this planned for this entire 2,000 people. We've got 2,900 people in the community right now, and it took us 100 years to get there. I mean, it took us, you know, to fill up Sundance, it took us 14 years. So if you look and say, okay, that's 50 acres. This is 150 acres. So this is going to be something that when you're all retired, you're going to drive past and go, hey, I did that. That's really cool. We made some decisions on that, and that's what it looks like at full build out. But it might take 20 years to get there. And so I don't know what housing's going to look like in 20 years. We might all be we might have had tiny houses that they've all stuck together, and now they want big houses again, and they want, you know, they're all shipping container houses. You don't know. And so you have to be able to, in planning, be able to spin on that. And yeah, in Sundance, for example, that was the big thing. We had half the council that wanted lanes, and we had half the council that didn't. So guess what? You have half the lots in Sundance that have lanes, and you have half that don't. And that was how that decision came.
You have administration that wants paved.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're having them, they have to be paved. Yeah. Yeah. So these are how those decisions come out. Plus, you have the developer saying they don't want any lanes. And then we said, but we have parking problems, and so we need lanes, and we need to, so again, there's all these things that go into those decisions, and again, this is the big framework, and you get to pick and choose depending on what it is. And you want to have these policies that are flexible enough that it gets you to where you need to be, while still allowing the developer to do what their job is, which is to develop and make money. And your job is to develop and make the community. So it's that balance, and it's always tough decisions. And you're going to be facing tough decisions coming forward. But it's the idea of, if you have a vision, I mean, it's nice to know that you probably have a vision, and then someone's going to put something in front of you you never thought about. And then how flexible are you going to be to move with that new vision, or are you sticking to the old vision? And you don't know until it's put in front of you. So the idea about the MDP is it's slightly less than the SSRP or the regional plan, where it's really big motherhood and apple pie statements. You must all build community. Okay, how do we do that? Well, this is part of it. Then as you go to the land use bylaw stage, that's where you get into more detail about the lot sizes. But guess what? We still allow us to be flexible in those lot sizes. Can we give waivers? Can we be bigger, smaller, depending on what they're doing? Will we give an extra unit because, hey, they paved the parking lot, or they did something. So it's all about the trade-off. And again, it's being able to be flexible, and that's tough if you want sort of a rigid plan. And this is really difficult because it's not rigid. Planning is very
that's when I look at this, it's like it almost seems kind of rigid in a sense. Like this part is flexible, it's like the whole block of flexibility. This is kind of the whole block of flexibility. Is that a block of flexibility? Because that
It likely is, and it depends. Once they come back with the actual phasing, then you'll have an idea, because it may be to the point where it's a small enough phase that you really don't have flexibility. But that big block, well, you could put roads this way or this way, or put a cul-de-sac in, or they can be moved.
Well, I'm thinking that property owner, whenever they.
Yeah, and they may come back in and say, hey, we want to do a bunch of row housing. And you go, hey, that's maybe not a bad idea, or a bunch of duplexes, or we want to do something. And you go, yeah, maybe that does make sense, because it's really important, or just that one little bit. I'm just kind of going, well, I think we're going to probably need more. That's my thought.
That's my thought
too. But it is one of those ones where in the new plan, there's another flex site, which that was great, which is, again, our bylaw says you have to put it near roadways because they create a lot of traffic. So you want it near an arterial road. You want it near park space because, again, if they're multifamily, they don't have as large their own yards. They want to be able to use that community space. You want to have it near schools because, again, that's usually where, young families, before they can afford to move to the rest of the places. And so, there's a criteria of where we want these things placed. And normally, if you think about City Lethbridge, and I'm thinking about crossings, and you drive into crossings, there's some big, multi-developments. But if you look at it, I was thinking about your comment, Mayor, about, people running, how safe is it? And I'm thinking, well, it had all the houses out and all the parking's kind of inside, and it's, it's safe, and you're not running out onto whatever that one is, I can never remember.
Right.
Move up, there's ways of design that would actually create something that would meet both requirements. So again, it's just kind of picking and choosing sort of the things and trying to wrap your mind around, because there's so many different things. Like I said, I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and every day there's something new and cool and that you learn and you think, boy, I wish I'd done that differently. So I've got a couple of communities that I drive by and I won't say anything, going, boy, I won't do that again. Just kind of.
I did that.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah, I did that. So, but you learn and you say, okay, well, and again, I'm sure Kevin has a lot of things that we can tell you about why things are the way they are. And, things that could be better, and things that are really good and that we should duplicate. So, and you may say, well, I don't want to duplicate that, and that's your choice, and that's great. And that's part of it, because you do get to set it. So understanding, and that's why I say to all councils, if the previous council had changed the MTP, you can undo the MTP. You can change anything. That's your choice as council. These are your visions. But also understand that in 10 years, when things change or times change, they may undo what you did. So that's just the nature of what this is. And that everything there's a process to amend anything. So sky's the limit if you choose to do it. It definitely can be incorporated. So it's just what you want to do. So I think I'll leave it back to Jeff to maybe let me know what you figure out what this visioning. So I think that's really good. Love to be involved. Just on this, just quietly, which would be so hard to need a piece of tape, maybe. If you, just so I can, listen and be a fly on the wall. But I think there's some real opportunities, and I think it is, we're kind of at a crux. We do need to, when we come through this, the MDP, because it's so long-term, you maybe have a little more time on that. I would recommend that we start working on this land use bylaw, because I just laugh because it says 2019 on it. It was all ready to go in 2019. COVID and whatnot. We have some amendments that have not been incorporated from MGA changes. So we do need to, hopefully by maybe before the end of school. I hate doing any open houses or any kind of public consultation when we get into summer. I think that's really unfair to the public and yourselves. So if we could, try to get something through, and maybe I'll work with Jeff to see if there's any times for some communities of the whole that I can book and chat about that, so we can get moving and then get some consultation figured out, and then book some stuff and get it all done before we all take a summer break. I'm sorry, I don't get a break. Before you take a summer break.
I love how we still refer to it as new. New.
New.
It is, it still has growing pains because of COVID, right? It's still getting challenged, like our most recent appeal, right? It was.
No, and that's what's interesting when you do an appeal, you then go back and go, okay, how did that turn out? Did we have the policies in place that made, that we got the result we wanted to get? Do we need to strengthen it? Or is that, a reasonable outcome? So it's always interesting to do that. But there's always changes that come when it comes to land use. So.
That's great. Is there any other questions, comments? All right. Well, we're looking forward to this visioning and all this stuff. So,
like I said, this is my fun. Thank goodness I don't have to do budget. So you guys do that. You do the numbers. I'm gonna, as I said, geek out on this.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And have a great night, and I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Yes.